Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. It is 3 p.m. here in the UK and it's 10 a.m. Eastern time, and you're all most welcome to join us here at 0 Days Live. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to the middle of the week. It's Wednesday, of course, today, and it's show number 30 for us out of our 40 mammoth run sessions that we've committed to for 0 Days Live. Where has the time gone? We are going to be joined in our virtual studios in a few moments by Tameron Chappell, who's a chartered occupational psychologist, to talk to us about the subject of CISO stress, a subject that we've touched on here a number of times during the shows that we've been running at 0 Days Live. But before that, tomorrow, just a sneak peek, we're going to be taking a glimpse at the work being done by the Cyber Protect Network to help us all become more secure. And then, of course, we move into Friday, where we round off the week with our fun Friday session. We're going to be embracing National Chocolate Chip Cookie and Pizza Party Day with esteemed journalist Dan Swinhoe from CISO magazine. So do please join us then. Hello, everybody. Hope you are well. I'm Stuart Reed, and I'm with Nominet, focused on cyber solutions. And as usual, today, as with every other day, I am in the chair to welcome our special guests each and every day of our live shows. And just a quick reminder about Nominet, which of course is primarily known for being responsible for managing the .uk domain. We've been doing that for over 23 years now, with something in the order of 15 million domains currently under management. Now, building on this strong heritage and understanding of DNS, we also provide cybersecurity solutions to protect both networks from a government and an enterprise perspective worldwide from cyber attacks, including providing service to the UK government's National Cyber Security Centre. And ensuring people are connected, included and secure is at the heart of what we're doing at Nominet, and it's probably arguably more important now than ever before, with all of the physical activity of meetings and conferences being paused right now. We thought we'd bring you an interactive show in 0 Days Live to bridge that gap that's potentially been left behind. And it's really an accessible community for everybody within the cybersecurity community, or that has a simple interest within cybersecurity. Now, as ever, I am joined both front of house and behind the scenes here with a highly capable team, making sure everything runs just the way it should be, albeit remotely. And of course, remotely is what we all are right now. And we're asking our burning question of the week in that vein. What have you done differently in the lockdown phase that you want to continue afterwards? So please do let us know by typing into the console on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, for me, I've been thinking long and hard, and we've got to midweek. And I think I've seen that we've all become perhaps a little bit less wasteful, especially in the UK. There was the infamous stockpiling of toilet rolls, but I have noticed that certainly in our own household, we're just really buying what we need right now. And I think at the very least, that's creating less waste, certainly throwing away less food as a result of the trips to the supermarket. And it'd be quite nice, I think, if that kind of activity continued post-lockdown, so that we were more mindful and less wasteful. Steve, what is it you would like to see post-lockdown?
Yeah, I like that shirt, and for me, similarly, I think we've done a lot more of using what we've got in the fridge and the freezer, and making meals from scratch from what we've got, and because we've had to. So for me, the kind of thing to carry on is actually stop wasting money on things like takeaways and probably unnecessary outings for food when actually we've got lots of food that can be used in the fridge and the freezer. So yeah, same thing for me, I think.
Yeah, I think people are really starting to think about it and revisit some of the old habits that perhaps are just easy to slip into, but were, as you say, perhaps unnecessary. So, keeping outings and takeaways to perhaps a treat rather than a regular go-to. So we'll see what happens after we get there. Anyway, thank you very much for that, Steve. Now, this show, of course, is not the same without all of you guys tuning in at home. And we're delighted, of course, to welcome our regular viewers and new audience members each and every day of the week as we start to build out our accessible community to bring people together, hear from others in the industry, get a roundup of what's going on in the news, share some thoughts on best practice, and of course, interject a little bit of good humor along the way as well. So with that in mind, of course, we do cover a lot of important subjects in each of the 30 shows now that we've done, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. As a quick reminder, each of our shows is about 30 minutes or so. It is absolutely live here as well, as regular viewers will recognize, because we're live, going to be some mild blips along the way, and there have been a few mild blips along the way, but nothing we've not been able to move past. And we hope that when you do witness a mild blip on the show, you just agree it's part of the reason you tune in to see us as often as you do. And remember that whilst we are live each and every day, we are also available at your convenience. So we are also on demand for your leisure. Check us out at nominetcyber.com/0dayslive to pick up any of the shows that you might have missed. And as I say, there's now 30 of those on demand. Please do also get involved. As I said, this is not the same without you all tuning in and getting involved. So if during today's live show or any of the others that you choose to join, you want to ask us a question, give us a comment, please do so using the console on your screen, and Kerry will read them out during the webcast. And speaking of Kerry, what have you done differently in lockdown that you'd like to continue afterwards, Kerry?
So yeah, I think around remote working really. So prior to this, I didn't really work from home very regularly. Definitely really felt the value of going into the office. But I think this has kind of taught me that I can adapt to working from home. And sometimes, yes, it is better to be face to face, but that doesn't have to be the case all the time. Really think about, do you need to make that extensive bit of travel to get to a 1 hour meeting, or can you dial in remotely? You know, when's appropriate to do it? So just kind of having more flexibility, I think, in the work environment.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point, because you know we've now been enforced into this kind of working from home or remote working type of scenario, and it probably helps put into perspective that, exactly as you say, whether we do necessarily need to be face to face for every single engagement. Now, of course, face to face contact and physical meetings, there is no kind of substitute for that, and a kind of a needs-based approach. But that said, there are probably plenty of times when we've attended a meeting or a series of meetings that perhaps we could have equally have done working from our remote locations. And especially as we start talking about the carbon footprint more and more, this is perhaps our opportunity to really think about what we can do to help the environment, as well as allow us to be slightly more flexible and efficient as well. So I think that's a good one. Thanks, Kerry. Now, as I mentioned a few moments ago, today we're going to be talking all about CISO stress, a subject that's very important and one that we've covered on this show a number of times before. But before we welcome today's special guest, first let's look at what the CISOs themselves think.
The life expectancy of a CISO is around 18 months. We're seeing a lot of, the move around different organisations, which is pretty sad, that you're under that much pressure.
There is definitely a lot of stress depending upon, if, for example, there's a new threat that's in the news and it's moving quickly and you can't, you feel maybe that you can't get your team or your organization to move quickly enough in response as well.
If you don't have the right team and your leaders are not investing, you're mostly doing 5 jobs. So the stress on that person and the team that they do have can be pretty difficult.
Unfortunately, when a breach occurs, all too often people, organisations, individuals, we look for someone to blame. So if there is a data breach, quite often that blame can rest on their shoulders, which is a heavy burden to carry.
People deal with pressure in different ways. I always just say, let's not worry about the blame, let's get on and fix it. And then we'll learn our lessons from it and move on.
the CISO does feel it directly, and also I think that they are probably seen by the rest of the organisation as the responsible party, and that's something that also has to change, because we're seeing more and more from a board level perspective that they're seeing the relevance of a CISO role and they see it as being critical for their organisation, but they don't necessarily recognise that they also play their part in a good security posture. So a CISO, in order to be successful, probably needs to feel that they're empowered and enabled to make the changes necessary to improve that security within the organisation.
Everyone within the organisation has some responsibility and some accountability towards information security and data protection. But ultimately, the real pressure sits with the CEO or the business owner. They're the people, they're the entity that really is driving the culture of information security.
It's not all about plugging gaps with another tool and another tool. It's having a real security agenda, understanding where they are, and having the right teams with the right skills.
We have to stay on our toes, and we have to stay really focused on, what is coming around the corner, and to be open to that. But again, I think if you're not excited by that, then perhaps you're in the wrong job, because it certainly is always going to be there.
Well, some interesting points that were being made just there and then. Also, I wasn't quite expecting to see myself on there as well. I almost wore that shirt today as well, so that was a happy coincidence that I didn't. So you got 2 for the price of 1 today. As I said, interesting points raised there. And to talk more about some of those points raised, today we're welcoming to our virtual studios Tameron Chappell, who's a chartered occupational psychologist. Welcome to our virtual studios, Tameron. How are you today?
Hello, I'm good. Nice to see you. I think I'm connected. Just checking I am.
Jolly good. There we go. Can see you loud and clear there and hear you as well. So brilliant. So thank you very much, Tameron, for joining us today. Now, before we get into the subjects that were raised as part of that video just then, do want to ask you one of our burning questions of the week, which is, what have you done differently in lockdown that you'd like to continue afterwards?
I've been watching your videos already, so I think some have already been covered, but I thought the one that probably stood out the most to me is hand washing. Sadly, I have an 8-year-old and he comes home with all manner of bugs and dirt and things generally, and I think anything to be done around increased hand washing hygiene is a good thing. But I kind of agree with your points earlier and Kerry's as well, around not just the personal hygiene but the emotional hygiene. I think of spending more time talking to each other about how you're coping. That's not normally the things we do with work colleagues, and I think that's something that's positive to carry forward, so that you kind of open that discussion and dialogue for people.
It's been kind of all too easy to look at all the negatives of what lockdowns have brought to us, and unquestionably there have been some really tough things that have happened as a result of lockdown. But there are some things that are positives that we're highlighting here, and we're also getting comments from our audience as well. So it's nice to see that we're able to kind of embrace the positive pieces that have come out of this, as well as reflect on some of the more negative things that we want to change going forward as well. So thank you for that, Tameron. Now, very quick introduction for the benefit of our viewers today. Can you give us just a quick overview of your background?
Yeah, so I've always been in psychology in some manner. I started out in research, looking at language and teaching statistics. I was a lecturer, the joy, and then was looking at public health research, so how to help people with their social and emotional development. And then had a stint overseas living in Japan, and when I came back set up my own company. But now I kind of balance working for other organisations and doing things, but it's all around coaching, leadership development, board evaluation, those kind of things.
Great. Well, thank you for giving us an overview there. And of course, the subject of today is around CISO stress. And as regular viewers to this show will be aware, we conducted a study earlier in the year that was really focused on CISOs and how they're coping or how they're feeling as far as stress. In fact, I've got a copy of the report just behind me there as well. It does seem that CISOs are really starting to struggle with a lot of stress. Do you find this surprising based on your experience?
In some ways, yes, and in some, no. I think there are trends that are showing that everybody's feeling slightly more stressed in a work setting, but the nature of the job that they're doing means that they're in a kind of a profession that is exposed to threat in its very essence. So that's going to highlight that for them. So I was possibly surprised at how many people that had answered that questionnaire said that they were experiencing it, but I'm not surprised that they are experiencing stress and that it's slowly increasing year on year.
And you mentioned as part of the introduction that you work for a lot of other organisations as well. So given your kind of breadth of experience there, what other roles do you think also suffer with a lot of stress?
I think that's kind of a question behind a whole workshop in some ways, because there are certain professions that are more inherently stressful. So people can think about them, you know, like frontline workers, firefighters, all of those kind of naturally pressured environments. But whether the individual feels stress within them is down to a lot of different factors. So there are, if you look at the statistics, any healthcare, education, any kind of public health sector work is usually rated by people as being more stressful when in it. But stress is quite a personal fingerprint in some way. So one person's pressure is another person's stress. So it's a difficult question to answer in a short way.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because you know it seems that people are willing and thankfully so to talk a lot more around the stress that they may be feeling as well. So having a kind of an open forum to be able to share that. And here at Nominet, we do a lot of work to kind of encourage you know the kind of the decompression of some of those stressful activities. We arrange all sorts of different things as part of our business, and we also train others to look out for the signs in colleagues too. So it seems that it's a subject that is starting to gather momentum in terms of being spoken about more openly, which is certainly a good thing. As part of our report, of course, we did find that the stress felt by CISOs was having a pretty big impact on personal relationships and also their own mental well-being. Do you think that the stress in the workplace often has that kind of impact, regardless of the role?
Absolutely. I think it's a fallacy to think you can separate work from home. We are whole people that take our whole self to work and home. We might have different roles that we play in work and in home, but we are still the same people going between them, and they inevitably have an impact on each other. And in fact, the stress behaviours, the derailer behaviours that you show are most likely to be shown when you're either under pressure and stress or not self-monitoring, which is usually when you're at home with the people that you love and spend time with. They're the ones that actually might see more of the stress than you would see a colleague might see, because you're more relaxed and you can't hold on to it. You're not kind of monitoring yourself in the same way.
And you mentioned a few moments ago as well that it's quite a complex situation, stress. You mentioned that kind of stress and pressure affects people in slightly different ways, or manifests itself in different ways. Yeah, do you think there's some characteristics around the type of factors that contribute to workplace stress the most that people should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some great sources of information out there. There's the Health and Safety Executive, which is a government website, has a whole heap of resource that you can go and read the research and the evidence behind it. There's a whole manner of anecdotal evidence that you can read on LinkedIn and elsewhere, but I would recommend you go and find out what the research shows. And there are a number of work-related factors that have an impact on stress. And that includes things like the demands of the role, which you found in your questionnaire, but also how much control you feel you have in your actual work environment, and how much support you have from the organisation. And that can be as simple as how much information you're given, and the interpersonal relationships have an impact, but then so does the clarity of your role. So if you're really clear about what it is you're supposed to be doing and how, then all of those things contribute to stress. And if the organisation is going through change and they're not communicating that clearly, then that's going to have an impact as well. So it doesn't sound like it, but there's 6 separate factors in there, and those are the things that the research shows in a work setting have an impact on stress. And actually organisations are under a legal obligation to have a risk assessment around those areas, and that's where the Health and Safety Executive website can help. There's lots of toolkits in there. So that's the work.
Well, and I think that's, those are interesting pieces, and I'd encourage everyone to go and look at those for themselves. And of course, we've touched, in fact, a couple of times on this show around general well-being as a result of the situation, this pretty strange situation that most of us are experiencing right now, which invariably is ended in irregular or perhaps longer hours. Do you think longer working hours becomes an issue for workplace stress as well?
It definitely can, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. It's not cause and effect, it's correlational, and it depends very much on the way that the individual interprets those longer hours. So some people enjoy it and are motivated by it and have managed the expectations in their work and their home life so that long hours don't impinge and impact, and others don't or do less well at that, and that's when it can be stressful. It depends on your natural temperament in terms of your energy levels and pace as well. So there's a multitude of factors that interact. So that's what makes it a kind of a stress fingerprint in some ways. There are patterns, and the longer hours you work, the less time you have to recoup and renew and recharge. So everyone's going to lose from that, really, if you're working longer hours.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point in terms of the breaking of the cycle between the work and the kind of the recharge piece is certainly an area that we touched or explored on this show from a well-being perspective. Now, the other thing that we did also cover in our CISO report was around the stress that CISOs particularly felt around communicating issues to the board. Do you think the kind of the communication aspect is also potentially a big form or big source of stress?
Yes, huge. The most often cited reason for people going on having to leave work because of stress, one of their highest factors is about the relationship with they call it line manager, but it's basically how you communicate with your boss and how you give that information across as to how things are doing. And so if that's not working well, it's not a trusting and open dialogue, then that will cause stress, because you can't talk about those things like the demands and how you're managing your work if you don't have that open dialogue.
Excellent, thank you. And as you might have noticed, Tameron, we've had Steve pop up on screen, not for the first time in these 30 shows that we've done so far, which usually means one of two things. He's either got something insightful to say or he has a question. What have you got for us, Steve?
I have a question. I was interested, you obviously talk about kind of communication in relationship with your line manager. Is money ever kind of something that can offset that? You know, we've seen over the recent years kind of security manager roles, CISO roles, you know, the average salary has increased, but is that ever a replacement for that good communication and reduced stress levels?
It depends on what your personal motivators are. Some people are more motivated by commercial aspects and financial remuneration. Others are more motivated by personal recognition or by being able to work and help others. So if you're someone who is really motivated by getting recognition through money, then yes, that's going to help reduce the stress levels and kind of balance the bit that you think is the contract, that I'm doing this for the rewards that I get from the organisation. But if that's not something that motivates you and you actually want to work more and be connected more, then that's not just throwing more money at you isn't going to help keep you on task and feel like you're doing a good, valuable job. So it kind of depends, which is why we advocate using psychometrics to help in the recruitment process, so you can understand in advance what someone's motivated at, manage that.
That makes sense, thanks. And what types of programs can companies put in place to reduce stress in the workplace?
There are quite a few, and again, that website that I mentioned shows you some of the ones that have worked really well, but mostly it's to do with anything that you do needs to be around the culture of the organisation and creating a more inclusive culture so that everyone can feel they can turn up and be accepted, and also a trusting culture about being able to open up and talk about these things. So you can do things like have really clear signposting to mental health support workers, or to mindfulness apps, or to shared exercise in a group. But I think it depends on the individual as to what helps them reduce their stress. So the more you can do around making teams work better interpersonally and having an open dialogue, the culture of open discussion, is going to bring out all of the things that need to be dealt with. So there's no quick fix or no quick tick box of, if I put this in place, we'll all reduce our stress and the world will be fluffy and fabulous. Sorry.
If only, that's all right, if only there was a. You described some of the kinds of initiatives there. Have you seen any that kind of give, I guess, a bigger bang for the buck, that have the greatest impact in terms of reducing stress levels? Or is it always going to be personal to the type of organisation that you're in?
I think it's there are ones that are around having mental health kind of advocates or people in the environment, so anything that raises awareness of the kind of symptoms you would see in yourself and in your colleagues, so that you can be able to have that open conversation, are the ones that seem to do the best. But it's really hard to measure the cause and effect of these in a traditional way that you would measure research. So, you know, you bring something in, everything changes and you can get a benefit. You've got to look at more complex things, like you're actually doing preventative work, so it's harder to measure. But engagement studies are the best way, engagement surveys, to find out how people feel engaged. I think the thing we could do most is to stop carrying on the dialogue and the narrative in an organisation that everyone has to be a hero as a leader and stay and work long hours and do everything better than everyone else. That's just not the way the world works, I don't think.
Agreed.
But yeah, put those superhero pants back in the drawer for another time, I think.
How do you know I was wearing those?
Yeah, take note. So just wanted to pick up something that we touched on earlier, but Tameron, do you think that the current remote working situation, this kind of unique situation we're finding ourselves in, has potentially caused a spike in workplace stress?
I'm almost definitely, for certain temperaments, for certain personality types, those who need more connection and more social gregariousness are probably struggling quite a lot to get what they need from a Zoom call. It's not the same as face-to-face. Those who are more reflective, actually they're not escaping either, because they may be forced into a lot more Zoom contact than they are usually comfortable with. So I think probably everybody is suffering in some ways, and it's such a strange situation that we're picking up on the kind of social contagion of issues really as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and this is a strange situation that we're all finding ourselves in right now, and certainly a difference between choosing to work remotely and kind of having it enforced. And I think that's an important distinction that the inference of what you're saying there as well. So thank you for that, Kerry. I know this is a subject that touches everybody. So what have we got coming in from the audience around this?
We've got some good ones. So Tam, Francis is asking, in tests you get bucketed into groups such as being red. Is it literally that easy just to understand 4 different types of personas, or is it more complicated than that?
This is a whole day's workshop. Move away from the red buckets. Those are tools that are there to just give you a really broad brush stroke. The things that psychologists use really to properly look at your personality and how to predict how you behave are much more complicated than that, which is not surprising because we all know we're more complicated than being 4 types of colours. So there is lots more around that. If you're curious, you can find it out. But yeah, personality is the way to go, I think, in many ways to look at this.
And so Julie's asking, what are the best coping mechanisms for stress in the workplace?
Depends on what Julie's personality type is. Anything that you can do to figure out for yourself how you show stress. So you need to ask yourself, how do I usually respond to stress? And go and ask those people who know you well, because they might have blind spots and you don't really know what's going on. And then start to recognize those. And when they happen, don't blame yourself. Recognize that they're there as a flag to let you know that there's something going on, and then figure out what you need to do to help reduce that. So breathing and mindfulness are all good, but for some people it's going out for a walk, for another it's chatting, for another it's chocolate. You need to think about your own personal response, but do a bit of reflection about where your stresses show themselves.
Okay. And then Raj is asking, which is slightly linked to that, how can you help colleagues who may be stressed?
And the best thing you can do is listen, but listen without judgment and listen without offering solutions. It's very easy to hear someone talk and then go, what you should do is this, or where you should go is that. There's a difference between listening and signposting to places where you can get help, and listening and telling someone what they should do to make their life better. So anything you can do around active listening and empathy is the way to help support a colleague, I would say, the quickest way.
Brilliant. And then finally, from David, we've had, what are your top tips for minimizing anxiety in the current COVID climate?
Be kind to yourself. I think we've been told to be kind to everyone else. I think if you treated yourself like you would treat your best friend, we'd all be a lot less stressed and a lot less anxious. And a lot more permissive about what we need to do. So it's a really tricky, difficult time. Give yourself permission to be a bit angry, a bit sad, a bit lost, a bit happy, and be kind to yourself, I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the questions, and also thank you for that, particularly the last piece there as well, Tameron. That's something that I think is often overlooked. You're right. We're often looking out for other people. It's also important we take the time to look out for ourselves just as much as well. So thank you very much for joining us, Tameron, today. You've given us a really different perspective, actually, on the research that we conducted before all of this situation. So it's interesting to have that kind of put into context of what's going on now. Having spoken to many CISOs about the research, it's interesting to hear a psychologist's perspective on it. Before we go to the roundup of the news for today, I just wondered whether there's any final points you'd like our audience to remember as many endeavour to find their way in this new normal and this particularly stressful situation for a lot of people.
I think a good way to use this time whilst we're at home, some people say they're bored. If you've got small children and trying to work as well, that's a bit of a luxury, but there is still some time to reflect. And I would spend it thinking about, what do you really want to do in your work? How do you want it to be structured? What those demands are on your job, and then figure out if there's any ways you can shift those if you've got control over that in your work. And if not, think about how you're going to manage your own stress levels in terms of those positive actions to try and keep the stress levels down. So I would use the time to reflect and think about what it is you want to change in your world when we get, well, start now. I was going to say when we get to the other side, start now.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent advice, Tameron. Thank you very much again for joining us today. Now, it is almost the top of the show, but before we do close today's episode, just wanted to hand back to Kerry to do a bit of a wash up of today's news. Kerry, what's going on?
Yes, thank you, Stuart. So Computer Weekly reports on a recent study that has found that paying cybercriminals a ransom to recover your data adds over $500,000 to the cost of organisational recovery. The report has also found that 27% of organisations hit by ransomware have admitted to paying up. There's a story in ZDNet from the DHS, CISA and FBI, who have released the top 10 most commonly exploited software vulnerabilities across the last 4 years. The agencies have urged organisations to apply updates in order to prevent them. Facebook has flagged 50 million items of misleading coronavirus content, according to Evening Standard. In its latest community standards reports, the company has said that they have pointed more than 2 billion people to official medical guidance on COVID-19 via its own information centre. And thank you, Alan, who's highlighted on the chat that the CEO from Twitter has come out and said that all employees now have the option to work from home forevermore, relating to our conversation. Wow,
that is interesting. So we'll see whether other organisations follow suit quite so publicly on that one as well. So thanks for giving us that breaking news, Alan. Do appreciate that, and thank you again, Kerry, for the wash up of today's news. It's interesting. Again, you know, we're covering lots of different angles of cyber attack in today's news, but they're not so different. They're all things that we've covered on this show before. Ransomware again raising its head. Also interesting to kind of underline our point around the fact that you really shouldn't be paying a ransomware. It's adding to the costs of recovery, and there is also no guarantee you ever get the data back as well. So very interesting mix of news, but it's all very much the same theme that we've covered time and again. So around the vigilance, around the hygiene that's needed to be applied, even though we're working remotely. Don't get kind of lulled into this sense of security. It quite literally is something that we all need to be acutely aware of as we're working remotely. Steve, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we had £1 for every time we talked about ransomware on this show, I think we could retire by our 40th show. But I think one of the other things that is worth pointing out on that is there's growing evidence that the organisations that are attacking these companies with ransomware are actually doing a lot of work to maintain their presence within those company networks. So even if you've paid the ransom and you've got the key to decrypt your data, and it seems like there's an additional kind of cost to the organisation as well, the likelihood is that somewhere those attackers have maintained a presence and are likely to hit you again. And we've seen a couple of big companies in the recent months that have been hit twice within 6 months with big ransomware payloads. So you're almost just kind of painting a target on yourself by paying, by saying, come and have another go because we're going to pay up. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. And then on the second point, there's a good conversation on Twitter earlier about this and the fact that some of the larger vulnerabilities that have never actually been exposed, so the likes of Spectre and some of the kind of Intel processor vulnerabilities, have hit the headlines so much that people have rushed out to go and make sure that they're not going to be hit by something that's never actually been exploited. And yet out of those top 10 most commonly exploited software vulnerabilities, a lot of them are low-level Office vulnerabilities, kind of small pieces of software that are being exposed and just kind of being left to be unpatched whilst people are kind of focused on the big news items. So it just goes to show that sometimes it's not the big things that hit the headlines you need to focus on, it's some of the regular run rate applications that everyone is going to have in their company's software inventory.
And I think that again underlines the point of getting those basics right. So updating and patching your operating system as advised, making sure you're running the latest versions of antivirus and anti-spamware solutions, and also making sure vigilance as well. So not clicking on links that you just don't know where they've come from, or responding or opening attachments from emails that you don't know where they've come from. And I think you're absolutely right around the ransomware piece again. If you pay up once, it kind of sends the message that you're willing to pay again. So yeah, it is a tricky one, but our advice, or certainly my advice, remains the same. You should not be paying ransomware demands, as difficult as it may seem at the time, because it could probably come back to haunt you later on. Thanks for your thoughts on that, Steve, and thank you all for joining today. Very special thanks to today's guest, Tameron Chappell as well, who's Chartered Occupational Psychologist. Thanks to everybody who's joined us front of house as well, so to Steve and Kerry, also behind the scenes here at 0 Days Live, and of course to all of you tuning in and contributing today as ever. So tomorrow we're going to be taking a glimpse at the work being done by the Cyber Protect Network, so please do join us then. Until then, have an excellent rest of the day and see you again soon. Goodbye.